And then I suggest that we will talk in the question and answer format, because I know people want to know how it is up there. So since our conference is dedicated to cybersecurity, I would like to briefly say a couple of words about cybersecurity when you're up there on the spaceship. And actually, it has to do with us as well. All these people on the Earth, and there's a lot of information going up and down. So several times we had viruses. We quickly managed to fix that, but there was a point when we had to fight that. It's a valid point. And again, I would like to repeat myself, this is space. We have best specialists in cybersecurity in the space facility in Moscow, but a couple of times we did have an issue. So what other questions you have? Maybe on the mission, on the cybersecurity, and anything that you could be interested in the space missions. Good morning. So you were up there with your colleagues from the United States. Was there any kind of separation of data because they might have their own experiments and you had your own, probably you don't share all the data all the time? Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, they have their own experiments, we have our experiments, there are some joint experiments. This is what they noted in the video. And actually I can say that I don't know all the information that they worked with on in the facility here. So they're still working on this, they're still processing the data. My mission was to do my job, which has to do with biotechnology, and bring all this data here to the Earth lab. Of course, I do have an idea what each experiment was, but I can't really tell you what the result was. So what it's not possible to speak about. So what experiment was the most interesting one, if you can speak about it? We did a lot of experiments. I like the one that they talked about in the video. It's called Fluid Shift. We've been working on it for a year. It's a high-tech experiment because you won't see this equipment even in the high-tech hospitals here. This ultrasound, compact devices, and many others. And as you understand, heavy equipment on the station is impossible. So I could not imagine that I will be doing ultrasound of my eye by myself. So I will be doing it online. So there's an online picture is going to Earth, and the doctor in the center sees the picture of my eye. So it doesn't done with a gel, it's done with water. For ultrasound, they use a special gel, conductive gel. So, but you get a drop of water, and it's kind of hanging on your eyes like a water lens, and you do this ultrasound through this. So heart valves. So I was looking at it, finding it. So liver, joints, everything. So this eye scanning, negative pressure on the lower part of the body. So we also had to do this. I knew that this is important, that this is going to be very useful for those who will be following us, to be able to overcome all those difficulties in the void. So to be able to work after you landed. And about the confidentiality in the station. So, of course, you have some communications and some materials, and you as cosmonauts from different countries, you may not share this information. Do you have like separate rooms where you could work on your information? So there is such a thing as a closed channel. For example, if I have a doctor, I need to see the doctor. So I have this closed channel, and I talk to the doctor straight through the channel. Nobody can hear it. Because usually there are 5 flight control centers. This is Japan, Nashville in the United States, Moscow. So although all the others are cut, all of them are cut, and I'm talking to the doctor only, or the specialist that I need. Besides, I can call on the phone, any cellular phone in any point on Earth. In fact, it actually makes a cosmonaut life easier, because this is how you can have kind of like psychological release. So when you can't stand it any longer, so you can just call whomever you want. All these talks are recorded in Houston, because this is their channel. I don't think they do it with some idea in mind, but they probably do it from the technical point of view. So that's how it works. Talking about cybersecurity, so do you have any guidelines in case of some cyber incident, if something goes off, if something fails? Because as I understand, everything is done automatically. It's done remotely, so there are no like particular cables or wires that do that. So do you have like a disaster recovery plan? Yes, you're right. There are no like cables to pull, so everything is done through the computer. I wouldn't say that the crew has such a plan, because it's extremely complex task, and you need to be trained how to do it. For this disaster plan, in each flight control center, they have the groups that will work on it. And oftentimes, your laptop may fail because of a very high level of radiation, and the electronics fails much more often. So sometimes you just see the blue screen, so you throw your laptop away, and you get a spare one from the storage. Or if it's a failure of the program, then we communicate it to Houston or to Moscow, depending whose responsibility that was. So I wouldn't say that this is the one of the objectives of or responsibilities of the crew. But my question was, I understand that some of the channels are doubled, duplicated. So if there is a situation that you can get help from the Earth, and I understand that Voyagers that were launched many years ago, and somehow they were managed to reboot them remotely. But with today's technology, it's elementary. But if we're talking about the international station and the ships that will do the interplanet travel, do you have any guidelines for that? Minutes delay, but that's it. If we're talking about the voice communication, but there are different channels. There is like a control channel, there is a voice channel, there are many others. And to say that like no connection, so that doesn't happen. But if even we lost connection, the crew can control the station manually. The key point is to keep the orientation of the station in the space, because if we begin to spin, so then it's going to go north really, it goes south, because that's going to be a huge problems. And this is when they had in the Mir station, when they completely lost the control of the station. Then they managed to recover the orientation of the station. In other words, theoretically, the crew has the option of manual control of the station. They can go to Progress spaceship or others. So you can go in the ship and to control the orientation of the station. Did I answer your question? You've been up there for a year. So what was the hardest when you were up there? I'm sure there were some emergency situations, and which one you remember the most? I think the hardest one, and not only for me, for any cosmonaut or astronaut, I would say this is a psychological aspect of the mission. It's not that difficult to stay weightless, and you can get used to it, to those conditions and all that. But mentally, it's very difficult to feel being kind of torn from the Earth. So here, when you wake up on Earth, you see the green, you see birds, hear birds, sun. But there, I would wake up every day. So they didn't have a window. You have all these LED lights everywhere, and it's dark, and it's quite difficult in the morning. And kind of you're thinking to yourself, when it's going to end? You know, when. So you feel it, and the people who would do the space travel, these are people with a strong psychological resilience. Because when I came back, I wanted to look at the green and the forests. I remember when we up there were for 3 months, and I just asked, send us images of Earth from calendar, from whatever, like lakes, forests, mountains. So they send it to us, and I hang them in the module, and also they send us the Earth sounds. There's like summer in the village, or a thunderstorm. And when I turned on the thunderstorm sound, so I downloaded the computer file, and Scott, my American friend, he came to me, he listened to that, and he said, "Where did you get that?" And I said to him, "Well, you know, they sent it to me." So he came to me, he got this file for himself, and his American module, they had thunderstorm, and sometimes they would turn on the village sounds, birds and roosters and all that. Emergency situation. I would say the emergency situation is just like something is unfolding, sort of, you're ready for that, but you can expect that, but you need to fix it when it happens, like you poke your tire, or in your car. These are emergency situations that you expect and you can do during the mission, and you don't need to use extra effort to fix that. Once in the night, the alarm went off, so we see all lights are red. We got together in the central module, and you can see one alert comes after another on the American laptops. So we had like a cascade failing of all the systems in the station. While we're trying to figure it out, so it turned out that the cooling block failed, and it was not to lose all the systems and all the load that was on that block. We need to rewire it, so we almost lost half of the station while it was happening. So in order to fix that, we need to go out to space 3 times. So most of this was done by the American colleagues. another time, a piece of space garbage flew to us. Usually, the flight center, the control center, they know where this space garbage is traveling, so and they help us to maneuver. And usually we had the forewarning like 24 hours. So, but we were forewarned for like 1 hour before the impact. And we barely managed to close all the traps. We went to the ship, and that's the procedure when you have the situation. Soyuz spaceship is smaller than the whole space stations, and we also had the rescue ship. So it was 12:01 on GTM, and so we were sitting in the control center there waiting. We were waiting, and now sitting in the ship. So that piece of garbage, would you tell us, please? You were up there for a year, but how long did it take you to prepare yourself for the flight? I will tell you how long it took me to prepare for the flight from the point when I came to the crew. So it actually took me 13 years, and all these 13 years I was trained. There were some studies and theories, and so I flew to the space in 2010 for 176 days, and then 5 years later I flew for a year. So your colleague, American, he's a person of a different culture. What was the most difficult thing for you? For a year, he became probably the closest friend for you up there. And physically, it's for you, he was always close to you, like a couple of meters away.
Yes, indeed, this was the case because we had been together. My cot was in American segment, and basically, like in earthly terms, my bed was on the ceiling, his was on the floor, so to speak. And in these 340 days, I did not have a single skirmish with him, any conflict or any misunderstanding. Yes, we've had some issues with other Russians, but not with the American counterpart. And these guys, they are, all these policies and politicking and all this dirt is coming from the top down, as you can imagine. It's on the level much higher, but we are just a down-to-earth working guys, and I may be mistaken. I guess the tolerance has a certain connotation today, but they are more tolerant. Europeans and Americans, they will always come to help. They will never sort of lose temper, if you will, which is not always the case with some of our counterparts from Russia. Have you had some joint drills with them before the flight? Absolutely, because it takes about a year and a half, as we are like a double or a second crew, and another half year, 1 year in the prime crew. And whenever I come over to Houston, sometimes I spend time in the Scott's house, and home parties, and hanging out, and sailing, boating, flying together. You name it. They are very, very hospitable. I cannot say anything bad about them. What was, sorry, let's take turns, please, because what was the most difficult part when you came back home? It's always light, up there. But when this rescue team is opening your hatch after 340 days, you finally landed. It's simply like a tense part. I mean, descent, at least for me, from the moment of undocking until the touchdown, when the capsule is going down, you are like a string because you cannot afford any single mistake, or you will digress either to a hot sea, or you will burn down in flames, or something else. So descent is pretty crucial, pretty critical, and sleep deprivation, and whenever this air is coming into your, the earthly air is coming into your capsule after the hatch has been open, and you haven't had this earthly air for about a year. That's a quite amazing moment. It's like one of our astronauts said that you can basically eat or drink this earthly air as the bread and butter or any milk or drink. You finally realize that it's all over. Although I cannot say that for the first 2 weeks after the flight are easy, because you have the very acute period of adaptation back to earthly conditions, when your knees are swollen, your spine is your back is hurting, because in the space you add about 1 or 1.5 inches of your height. On the Earth, your spine is compressed back because you have the gravitation here, and it's quite painful. If you turn your head, sometimes you may have some lightheadedness, dizziness, and nobody's saying to you that this is like a resting time, because everybody wants to have a piece of you right after you landed. They put me in the centrifuge, like you've seen on the movie, on the next day after we've landed, just for you to have an idea. And this kind of experiments, like they are pushing you and making you to do some push-ups, pull-ups, and all the crazy things, because all these scientists, they're so curious to see what has happened with your body. I know you have to do it, but sometimes you're simply tired, because nobody's seeing you, humanity in you. They see only science. They want to squeeze out all the science out of you. So the first 2 weeks after coming back are the toughest ones, the most difficult ones, simply because everybody wants to do something with you, wants to do some testing, some exercises, and things like that. Another question is, speaking about the goal of this expedition, do you think it's realistic? You've been in the outer space, you've landed, let's say you land on a different planet, like on Mars. Will you be able to grab your tools and get down to work immediately, or do you have to do some adaptation? According to my condition, unless you or let's put it this way, if you do your fitness, if you do your exercises, we have 2 bikes, stationary bikes, and 2 treadmills in American segment on the ISS, and 1.5 to 2 hours a day you have to work out on the station. It's a must. If you'll be doing that along with some other programs, let's put it this way, because you have like an electrical stimulator that you have to use on the station, and Russians have stuck it behind the panel. Nobody was using it because it's difficult to put it on. I took it out, this electrical stimulator, and just before the landing I was using it for about a month and a half. It's like electric spasm therapy or something, like, you know, you plug it in and it beats you or shakes your muscles, and the guys were making fun of me. But anyway, you know, like, I've arrived in a better physical shape than after my very first flight. So if you stay in shape, I think it's quite realistic to land on a different planet and to get out. I can't say that you'll be able to, like, run away immediately or do crazy things, but you will be able to do some experiments immediately. You've seen me after landing. I'm sorry? So it all depends on a person themselves, and those scientists will be preparing them. Now, the engine is in progress, which will enable us to fly to Mars, not in 9 months, but in 2 months. And I believe that now, like aviation back in 1940s and 50s, in outer space exploration, we are at some kind of threshold of moving on to new technologies, and I believe that this is what's going to happen. Very soon, in my opinion, we will see some breakthrough technologies. I have a question. Could you please say, what do you think about the prospects of the commercial flights in Russia or from Russia? I think we have a lot of progress on that. And what kind of movies about the space do you think are quite realistic, or more or less realistic? As for the first part of your question, commercial flights into space, I think it's a thing of a distant future, because no business now in Russia is going to invest into commercial flights, because it will be the direct competition to the Russian space agency. You know, it will be very difficult to overcome stagnation. And no Russian business, because Russians like short money. Today you invest $100, and tomorrow you want to get $200. This is the Russian business mentality. But outer space is about long money. Nobody is going to freeze money that long and to risk this kind of money. Hello. There are some poles, like some areas, like on the outer orbit. Are we speaking about even going to Mars far away? Do these poles, do these like areas exist which you, as humans, you cannot even cross? I'm sorry, what do you mean? Yeah. Van Allen, these Van Allen belts, or Van Allen strips around the globe, and you cannot. You're speaking about Van Allen belts around the globe, right? Yeah, let me answer the first part of your question, because I usually forget when people ask two questions, I forget the second one. Well, it's a question more to scientists, but my vision is that Van Allen belts is basically the places which, it's like a magnet lines, it's a magnetic field of Earth. And Van Allen's areas have the higher radiation because they're heavy particles, charged particles in Van Allen. But the level of radiation depends on the solar activity in these poles. It's number one. Number two is the level of radiation when you pass these Van Allen belts also depends on the speed of your rocket. It is not that huge, and the spaceship is going through this Van Allen belt. It's going on a huge speed, so you do not get exposed too much on the radiation. Now, when you read, if you read and watch the media, they do not say about it. There is some ways to countermeasure radiation. On lead, to build something from the lead is very heavy, makes your spaceship very heavy. There's some medical and biological ways to counteract to radiation. It's basically like a chemistry, certain pills you have to take, which helps your body to deal with radiation. Stuff like that. It's, you know, you don't have to take it for the truth when what you see in the media. Another question: these weightlessness feelings. How can you describe them? Is it something like that? Like, how can you compare weightlessness as a feeling? Well, it's hard to say how you're flying in your dreams. I guess all of us do. But anyway, this flight in a dream is related to some effort. You're sort of like trying to overcome your gravitation in your subconscious mind. But at least these were my dreams. It took some effort for you to fly. But weightlessness is a totally different state. It's quite difficult to describe unless you feel it yourself. And when you say that I was sleeping on the ceiling, many people do not get it. Well, how can you sleep on the ceiling? When you come to your little area, your brain is perceiving this compartment in a totally different way. You do not have certain coordinates in your mind. We have like a notional ceiling and notional floor on the base, because usually the floor is under your feet and you have the windows, and the brain is like thinking, okay, this is my bottom and this is my top, but formally speaking, you do not have any coordinates, right? You don't have the south, north, and east, and west. And you can go to the ceiling, attach yourself to the ceiling. For example, we had Fridays, Friday nights. It was a very good time for the whole crew. Simple like a, friendly dinner on Fridays. And 6 people. Although the station quite spacious inside, but none of us would. Well, one person is on the bottom, the second person is on the top. You don't have any discomfort. You can lie or float wherever you want, and it's quite an unusual situation when you are being suspended. These guys like standing supposedly, and you're floating over this person. And only once in a while your brain kind of checks in and says, hey, this is very strange, the way you're floating over this guy. On one hand, it's very comfortable because you make a small push and you fly around the station wherever you want, under the table, over the table. It doesn't matter, you can just float through all these techniques. Whenever the shuttles would come and dock, you had to move about a lot. But on the other hand, there is a certain like a side effect when the liquid redistributes in your body, lymph and stuff, it's kind of flowing to your head sometimes, and you have like your face swollen. On the earth, actually, the dream of all women, you don't have any wrinkles. Your wrinkles pretty much disappear in outer space. This whole saliva is a little bit difficult to breathe on the station. And these effects during my first and second flights, at least my breathing was quite normalized. I was able to breathe through my nose, but only after 2 or 3 months. I cannot tell you details because it will take days and days for me to share all these little nuances. Good morning. What was the dominant language for communication on the station? And what language you could use in an emergency? Well, official language on the station is English. Everybody has to learn English. And Europeans know it. Americans and Canadians obviously do. I had known English as a part of my high school training and the university. I had big regrets because my English was not that good just before the flight, and I had to catch up since our colleagues were also trying to learn Russian, even though it was not mandatory, but still many of them would go to classes, Russian classes. We called it Runglish, not English, but Russian and English mixed together on the station. And since all of us have undergone quite an extensive training before the flight, no problems in communication whatsoever had happened on the station. Especially when you speak technically, so to speak, it's quite understandable, all the space things. It was a bit more difficult when we had some parties back in Houston, and when they began to talk between themselves, I would be able to catch only about 30% of those they were saying, because it's a slang, obviously. And the same truth in Russia. Whenever you speak to your Russian friends, I mean, who can catch these subtleties if you are not a native Russian speaker? Yeah. 2 more questions on the topic. Going back to the topic of our conference about information security, I wanted to ask you, did you have any separate instruction in case of cybersecurity incident, or all these issues would be regulated by the Earth, by the flight controls? And let's say if you, in case you would have any cybersecurity incident, what was instructions? What were you supposed to do? Nope, we did not have such an instruction, at least I did not see it. If you can see a problem, like computer-related problem, you simply report to the flight control, and there's a whole bunch of people on the shift. They are professional, very highly skilled people, and remotely they are dealing with your computational computer problem. Again, the crew, due to some objective reasons, cannot do that on the orbit. So we did not even bother about it. If you have the loss of radio contact, actually, when I started the very first time, it was a very, very unpleasant feeling after 40 seconds or 60 seconds from the start, when the rocket moved up. We were about 50 kilometers up in the air, and the voice of the operator is like fading away, and we are flying. The rocket is working. The systems are okay, but no connection to Earth. You cannot hear anybody. And it was a feeling like we're flying into a black hole. We're calling the Earth, calling back Moscow, Moscow. But it was quite a big stress, and only after one rotation around the Earth, we've had the good telecom connection. We've sort of pulled ourselves together. If you have the loss of connection on the station, let's say you don't have any radio, we have the internal on-board radio, like a last resort. It's just a amateur kind of radio station, and you can try to stay connected. Again, we have a telephone. Maybe this channel will work. In case of emergency, you can call to flight control regular, just via regular phone. Even if you have the loss of connection, we still have time on the station. Nothing horrible will happen in the next, let's say, 10 hours. If we have a loss of connection, the station will be without control. It will, we will be losing orientation gradually, but in the meantime, we'll be able to come up with something like this. In 20 years, we did not have such a situation.